Will you date me?
The main ballroom of the Imperial Hotel, illuminated by crystal chandeliers and surrounded by golden columns, vibrated with a grandeur calculated to impress. Every detail, from the red carpet to the aroma of French champagne, served a clear purpose: to display power. Guests paraded with practiced smiles, impeccable dresses, and raised glasses in celebration not only of the company's success, but of the untouchable image of the elite who ruled it. At the center of attention, the most whispered name of the evening was Kang Dae-hyun, the heir to a billion-dollar empire, who that night was to introduce to the world his future wife, Seo Ye-jin, a woman whose beauty and background perfectly matched the unattainable standards of that closed circle. Amidst the parade of vanity, few noticed the discreet entrance of a young woman in uniform, leading two children by the hand. Lee Ha-eun, hired as a temporary nanny by one of the families present, knew exactly what her place was: invisibility. However, in that environment where everything was measured by appearance, her presence stood out so strongly that it was impossible to go unnoticed. Whispers began to spread quickly, first disguised behind fans and glasses, then wide open in gazes that analyzed her with contempt. Still, Ha-eun maintained her composure, even as her heart raced under the weight of others' judgment. She knew that one slip-up would be enough for her to be completely annulled, or worse, humiliated in front of everyone, and even in the face of growing embarrassment, her gaze remained fixed on the children, trying to preserve a shred of innocence in that suffocating environment. But what no one there could have imagined was that, at that very moment, among the many gazes that pierced her like blades, there was a single silent gaze that didn't judge her. It observed. A gaze that would soon change everything. If this scene captivated you from the beginning, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This story will still surprise you. The music swayed the guests, and the hall seemed to exude vanity in every detail. Ha-eun, trying to remain invisible, circulated with the children, offering them small sweets and distractions so they wouldn't disrupt the party. Her eyes averted their judgmental stares, but with each step it seemed as if the distance between her and the elite grew even wider. There was no place for someone like her in that space where everything was measured in numbers and surnames. It was then that a sudden cry echoed among the crystal tables. One of the children, startled by the sound of the glasses clashing, sought refuge in Ha-eun's arms. With her natural tenderness, she hugged her and tried to calm her with soothing words, unaware that she was becoming the cruel center of attention. Many guests frowned, uncomfortable with the interruption amidst their welcoming speeches, as if the nanny's presence were an unforgivable mistake. Seo Ye-jin, in a shimmering dress and sharp gaze, seized the moment as if spotting an opportunity to reaffirm her superiority. She walked toward Ha-eun with measured steps, smiling with that false delicacy that charmed crowds but hid thorns. In her right hand, she held a glass of red wine that reflected the golden lights of the hall like liquid blood about to be spilled. With a subtle gesture that might have seemed like a mere accident to the untrained eye, she tilted her glass slightly over. Ha-eun's uniform. The wine spread crimson across the dark blue fabric, staining it like an exposed scar. The room held its breath for a second before a quiet chuckle began to echo. "Nannies should be in the kitchen, not the main hall," Ye-jin said, her voice soft enough to sound like innocent irony, yet firm enough to cut like a blade. Ha-eun froze. The heat of the liquid on her clothes seemed to turn into fire against her skin, burning not from the contact, but from the shame of being exposed. To so many eyes, some guests pretended not to see, others laughed openly, as if the scene were a natural part of the show. The young woman bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to escape, knowing that any weakness would be celebrated as a victory by those who humiliated her. The child in her arms looked at her innocently, running his little hands over the stained fabric as if to help her erase her shame. It was this pure gesture that kept her standing, preventing her from collapsing in front of everyone. Still, she felt as if she was surrounded by invisible walls pushing her out of that place. Ye-jin, satisfied with the effect of her performance, raised her glass again, now empty, and walked away as if nothing had happened, leaving behind a trail of laughter and venomous comments. Ha-eun took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain firm. But deep down, she knew this was only the first wound she would have to endure that night. What she didn't know was that the second humiliation would come in an even more cruel way, in front of everyone, with a microphone in her hands and the entire room forced to listen. As Ha-eun stood motionless, trying to catch her breath after the embarrassment, the hall resumed its rhythm, as if nothing had happened. Fake laughter and rehearsed toasts overshadowed the newly created awkwardness, but to her, each sound felt like a hammer striking her dignity. She held the child tightly in her arms, as if that tiny being were the only anchor capable of keeping her upright amidst an invisible storm. Among the guests, however, there was one pair of eyes that never left her. Kang Dae-hyun, the man around whom the entire evening revolved, remained silent, observing with an intensity that contrasted with the indifference of the others. His expression, normally impassive and calculated, betrayed something different, a growing unease and discomfort that stemmed not just from the spilled wine, but from cruelty disguised as elegance. As Ye-jin smiled for the photographers, disguising the malice in her gesture, Dae-hyun recalled the times he had seen Ha-eun in completely different situations. At the charity hospital run by his company, he remembered her in the same simple uniform, but surrounded by sick children who smiled just for receiving her attention. It was impossible to forget the way she would kneel down without hesitation to play with the little ones, unconcerned by the looks of contempt or the lack of recognition. In that moment within the golden walls of the hall, he realized that the woman before him was the same. Steadfast in her kindness, even when the world tried to crush her, Ha-eun, unaware she was being watched, took a deep breath to contain her emotions. Her teary eyes reflected the internal struggle between the desire to disappear and the courage to remain. Although she avoided looking at those present, she had the strange sensation of being closely scrutinized, as if someone saw beyond the stain on her clothes and the cruel whispers. Dae-hyun raised the glass to his lips, but didn't drink. His gaze remained fixed, studying every detail of this young woman who, without realizing it, was already changing the course of the evening. He didn't say a word, didn't take a step, didn't show any overt reaction, and precisely this silence created an invisible tension that hung over the room. It was as if, at any moment, something could shatter the fragile balance of the party. And while Ha-eun tried to compose herself, believing that the worst was over, she didn't imagine that the next wound would come in the form of sharp words, thrown in front of everyone with the force of a microphone and the cruelty of someone who knew how to transform pain into a spectacle. And it was at that moment that the night turned towards the most cruel humiliation, one that none of those present would dare to forget. The hall still vibrated with a rhythm of apparent normality, but behind the smiles and raised glasses, a silent atmosphere of judgment lingered. Ha-eun, even as she tried to hide in a corner with the children, knew that eyes were still following her, not because of her importance, but because of the mark of shame newly etched into her clothing. She felt like an intruder in forbidden territory, tolerated only because her presence served a practical purpose. However, fate had another blow in store, this time even more cruel and public. Seo Ye-jin, radiant in her silver, sequined dress that reflected the lights like a shield of arrogance, walked to the makeshift stage for the speeches, Her heels echoed on the marble, and each step seemed to carry a calculated intention. She took the microphone with the confidence of someone accustomed to dominating a room and smiled with the false delicacy of a perfect hostess. The room fell silent, and all attention turned to her, awaiting words that would extol the importance of the evening. What a joy it is to be gathered. To celebrate this very special moment, he began, his sweet voice carrying through the room with rehearsed softness. The first few sentences were formal, full of praise for the future of the conglomerate and the engagement that promised to consolidate two powerful families. But soon, like someone slipping a hidden blade beneath a silk glove, his words took on an ironic tone. It's impressive to see how grand this party is, and how, amidst sophistication, even a nanny can be part of the scenery. The suppressed laughter echoed like crackles in a bonfire. Ha-eun felt her heart drop, her knees trembling under the weight of embarrassment. The microphone transformed Ye-jin's viciousness into a spectacle, amplifying every syllable to the farthest corners of the room. It was as if Seoul's own elite were being invited to laugh at her, applauding a cruelty disguised as humor. Some guests looked at each other knowingly, savoring the sense of belonging that fueled someone's exclusion. Others simply looked away, not out of compassion, but out of fear of being the next target of the CEO's ex-fiancé's venomous tongue. Ha-eun, cornered, hugged the children tighter, as if she could protect herself behind their innocence. And it was precisely this innocence that shattered the spectacle. One of the children, noticing the tears in Ha-eun's eyes, ran to her and wrapped her arms around her, repeating loudly, "She's not ugly. She's the best person I know." The room filled with uncomfortable murmurs. The pure and unexpected gesture left Ye-jin momentarily speechless, but soon her expression cleared, hiding her fury beneath a bitter smile. Ha-eun, for her part, felt her soul tremble. She couldn't continue to be just a passive target of ridicule. The silence that fell after the child's words opened a breach, and within her grew something she never imagined she had: the courage to respond. Her chest heaved, her hands trembled, but the voice that was about to leave her lips was no longer that of someone resigned. The entire hall awaited Ye-jin's next speech, but unexpectedly it was Ha-eun's voice that rose into the space, trembling and firm at the same time. And what she said that night, in front of so many incredulous faces, was able to silence even the cruelest laughter. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath as Ha-eun's voice, initially shaky, broke the silence. She hadn't planned to speak, nor had she wanted to be the center of attention, but the cruelty exposed before everyone had crossed an invisible line. Her teary eyes didn't hide the pain, but revealed a flame that had, until then, remained hidden. "I didn't choose to be here to impress anyone," he said, his voice echoing through the microphone someone had left on the table next to him. His tone wasn't one of arrogance, but of an honesty so raw it cut through the air. "I'm here because someone trusted me with the most precious thing they have, caring for their children. Maybe to some that means nothing, but to me, it's the most honorable responsibility there is." The words, imbued with a simplicity that clashed with the ornate language of the elite, resonated deeply with many present. Some looked away, embarrassed after laughing seconds before, while others merely shifted in discomfort, unable to face the dignity that emerged from someone considered inferior. Seo Ye-jin maintained her forced smile, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her growing hatred. It was inconceivable to her that this woman would dare use her own voice in a setting where she was supposed to remain invisible. She tried to interrupt, but Ha-eun didn't back down. "You can laugh at my stained uniform, you can despise the way I live, but you can't take away my pride in what I do. While many here only know how to look at their own reflection in the crystal of their glasses, I look into the eyes of those who need me. and that to me is worth more than any jewel that shines in this hall. A heavy silence fell over the party. The orchestra had stopped, and the only sound was Ha-eun's heart pounding in her chest. She knew her words would cost her dearly, but she also knew this was the only moment she could stand up against the humiliation she was carrying. The children applauded timidly, imitating what they saw at home when something pleased them, and the innocent gesture echoed like a silent challenge to adult coldness. Some guests even smiled, disconcerted, unable to feign indifference in the face of such courage. Ha-eun took a deep breath and set the child back down on the ground. Her hands were still shaking, but the weight she carried seemed somehow lighter. She looked around and for an instant realized she was not only the target of contempt, but also of a new, curious, almost respectful attention. And it was exactly at that turning point, when everyone was trying to understand what had just happened, that an even more powerful and unexpected voice crossed the room, interrupting the atmosphere of uncertainty. Because, at that moment, the silence would be broken not by Ye-jin's hostility, but by the intervention of someone whose word could change the fate of everyone there. The weight of Ha-eun's speech still hung in the air when a metallic sound echoed through the room, the clink of a glass against the microphone. Everyone immediately turned to Kang Dae-hyun, who had remained silent until then, observing every detail like an invisible judge of the scene. His presence always carried authority, but tonight there was something different in the tone of his posture. He wasn't just the powerful CEO everyone revered, he was a man who seemed to have made an unavoidable decision. With firm steps, he approached the center of the room. His eyes swept the room with the calculated coldness of someone accustomed to command. But behind that mask lay a restrained indignation few would dare imagine. He placed his glass on the nearest table, calmly, adjusted the microphone, and when he spoke, his voice resounded like a blade piercing the silence. Enough! The simple, short word was enough to destabilize the atmosphere. The murmur ceased, and even the quietest laughter disappeared, as if forcibly ripped from each guest's throat. Ye-jin, still on stage, maintained her fake smile, but her eyes wavered at his expression. Today, at this party, I saw something that many here seem to have forgotten. Dae-hyun continued, his grave tone reverberating throughout the room. While some have spent time trying to diminish someone because of the clothes they wear or the role they hold, I witnessed dignity. And dignity is something that cannot be bought, no matter how many jewels glitter in this room. The whispers began timidly, like waves threatening to become a storm. Guests exchanged stunned glances, unable to believe that the most important man of the night was speaking out in favor of the woman everyone had tried to humiliate. Dae-hyun's parents, seated near the stage, exchanged tense expressions, as if they wanted to restrain their son, but were caught between pride and shame. He raised his hand, signaling silence again, and his eyes fixed on Ha-eun. His steady, direct gaze seemed to bare her soul, not in judgment but in recognition. While some here collect titles and estates, she collects something few can, genuine respect for others, and I will not allow that to be treated as weakness. Ha-eun felt her heart race, almost painfully. She had never imagined hearing something like this, much less in front of everyone who had ridiculed her just minutes before. The hall, once a scene of humiliation, now transformed into a courtroom, and Dae-hyun took on the role of unexpected judge. Ye-jin, unable to contain herself, began to protest, but his voice carried over firm and unwavering. If anyone here still believes they can measure worth solely by surname or fortune, they're mistaken. True worth is revealed in simple gestures, and this woman demonstrated that better than any prepared speech. A heavy silence fell, charged with shock and tension. No one dared applaud, no one dared laugh. It was as if everyone was waiting for the next word, the next move, because they knew this night could no longer end as it had begun. And what Dae-hyun would reveal next would be capable of shaking not only the party, but also the trust everyone had in his loyalty and his future marriage. Dae-hyun's final words hung in the air like thunder, still echoing after a storm. The room, so accustomed to the constant hum of voices and laughter, fell into an uncomfortable, almost suffocating silence. No one knew how to react, because what had just happened defied the logic of the elite gathered in that space. A CEO shouldn't stand next to a mere nanny. Not in that setting, not in front of the cameras and the scandal-hungry eyes. The guests began exchanging nervous glances, as if searching each other's faces for confirmation that they had indeed heard what had happened. Some older men shook their heads in disapproval, muttering that Dae-hyun had lost his mind. Elegantly dressed women hid venomous comments behind fans and glasses, repeating the words in whispers. A nanny. He defended a nanny. Disbelief spread like wildfire. Seo Ye-jin, still near the stage, felt her face burn as if struck by an invisible slap. The humiliation she had planned for Ha-eun had turned into a blow to herself. Her eyes flashed with anger, but her forced smile remained plastered on her face, like a mask threatening to crack at any moment. The pride that had always sustained her was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Dae-hyun's parents, figures respected by tradition and economic power, remained immobile in their chairs. His father, Kang Dae-hyun, clenched his fists under the table, trying to contain his fury, while his mother, Lady Eun-suk, stood erect, her eyes clouded with disappointment. For them, this wasn't just an inconvenient speech. It was a scandal that could tarnish the family name and jeopardize alliances carefully built over decades. Some of the young people present, however, looked at Ha-eun with a new curiosity. There was something magnetic in the contrast between her simplicity and the courage she'd gained from facing so many hostile stares. Quiet whispers arose among them, no longer of contempt, but of surprise. How could she speak like that? She's different from the others. The shock wasn't unanimous, but widespread enough to divide the room into two camps. Those who saw her as an affront to the established order and those who secretly were beginning to admire her. Ha-eun, for her part, remained motionless, as if still processing what was happening. Her heart hammered in her chest, and her ragged breathing betrayed the weight of the moment. Part of her wanted to run away, disappear into the shadows, but another part was beginning to realize that her voice could no longer be erased. And as the hall erupted in murmurs, a certainty grew in the air. Dae-hyun wasn't finished. He had opened a crack in the elite's wall, and everyone knew that if he took one more step, there would be no turning back. And it was in this climate of shock and disbelief that the CEO decided to reveal something from the past, a truth capable of transforming the scandal into an even greater earthquake. Silence still hung in the air when Dae-hyun took a deep breath and faced the audience again. His expression wasn't that of a man overcome by anger or impulsiveness, but rather of someone who had decided to reveal what he had long kept to himself. The guests watched him with anticipation and dread, unsure if they were about to hear a romantic declaration, a confession of weakness, or a frontal attack on the bride who was to be celebrated that night. "Perhaps many of you here don't know," he began, his deep voice echoing through the microphone, "but before this party was unplanned, before Ye-jin and I were even announced as a couple, there were moments when I realized the true difference between appearance and essence." The words intrigued those present. Murmurs spread among the tables, and Ye-jin pressed her lips together, trying to remain calm. The glint in her eyes betrayed the fear that something would be exposed, something that might crumble the imaginary castle she had built beside him. In our social foundations, we're accustomed to judging people by what They were by their last name, by the size of their bank account. I've done this too, but there was someone who showed me, even without knowing it, that there is a value far greater than any fortune. Everyone watched in absolute silence as he turned his gaze to Ha-eun. The spotlight was no longer on the rejected bride or the scandalized guests, but on the young woman clutching the children's hands as if clinging to her very life. For months, I visited the children's hospital that is part of the company's charitable project. There I saw pain, I saw hope, and I saw courage. And amidst so much hardship, there was a young woman who didn't mind kneeling on the cold floor to play with a child, even when no one was looking. This young woman is the same one you tried to humiliate today. A murmur of shock ran through the room. Dae-hyun's memories surfaced in his voice. Memories of Ha-eun holding children's books, teaching the children to draw, or simply offering silence and comfort to little ones battling cruel diseases. He didn't speak as if he were inventing a fable to impress. He spoke as if he were reliving every detail before their very eyes. While many here believe that status defines character, I learned that character is revealed in small gestures. She didn't ask for anything, didn't seek recognition, didn't care about appearances, and that's exactly what made me realize how blind we were. The words struck the hearts of those present with the force of a confession. Impossible to ignore. Some averted their eyes, others stared at Ha-eun as if seeing her for the first time. Ha-eun, for her part, felt torn between embarrassment and an unexpected wave of gratitude. She had never imagined that anyone, much less the most powerful man in that room, would have noticed her presence amidst so many shadows. Ye-jin could no longer contain her fury. Her smile had disappeared, and her expression was that of someone about to lose everything she believed was rightfully hers. She bit her lip until it nearly bruised, her mind racing for a reaction. But before he could say a word, Dae-hyun took a step forward, and his voice, firm as steel, cut through the silence again. And it was then, in front of everyone, that he decided to do something that no one would ever have imagined hearing that night. Dae-hyun's final words were still echoing as he firmly placed the microphone on the table and, amidst the absolute silence, descended the steps to the stage. Each step seemed to resonate like a drumbeat in the hearts of the guests, who watched in disbelief as the scene unfolded before their eyes. There was no more music, no more whispers, only the suffocating anticipation of something grand about to happen. Ha-eun, still standing, held one of the children's hands as if seeking the courage her body insisted on denying her. Her eyes fixed on Dae-hyun were filled with confusion, fear, and disbelief. The man who, just minutes before, had been nothing more than a distant figure, surrounded by power and unattainable luxury, was now walking directly toward her, as if the entire world had disappeared around him. The CEO, with a firm posture and a resolute gaze, stopped before her. For a moment, the distance between them seemed infinite, not in terms of physical space, but in the abyss that separated their lives. He extended his hand, and the entire room seemed to gasp. "Lee Ha-eun," he began, his deep voice reverberating effortlessly, as if the room itself had become complicit in his confession. "From the first moment I saw you, I knew there was something in you that no amount of wealth could buy. Truth." The guests looked at each other in shock. Some clapped their hands over their mouths, others murmured in astonishment, unable to believe what they were hearing. The reporters' cameras, already on alert since the scandal began, were now eagerly positioned, capturing every detail that promised to make headlines the next morning. Dae-hyun took a deep breath and, without taking his eyes off her, continued, "I don't want to live in a world where everything is about appearances anymore. I don't want a partner who's by my side just for titles or status. I want someone who teaches me to see value in the things that truly matter. And you've already done that." A collective murmur ran through the hall, but no one dared interrupt. The atmosphere was tense, as if everyone was awaiting the final explosion of a spectacle that had begun as a party and was now turning into a public trial. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Dae-hyun knelt before her. His impeccable suit met the polished marble floor, and the gesture, so unexpected, drew gasps and exclamations of shock. The man who could have had everything with a simple wave now stood in a position of humility before the woman everyone had humiliated. "Lee Ha-eun," he said, his voice firm and his gaze intense, "I don't want to wait another day to say this. Will you go out with me?" The hall erupted in muffled screams, indignant comments, and suppressed tears. Some applauded timidly, others shook their heads in utter disapproval. Seo Ye-jin, her fists clenched, looked ready to collapse with rage. Ha-eun, however, remained motionless. Her heart was beating frantically, and the world around her seemed to have become a blur. The public request, made before the elite who despised her, was an almost unbearable weight. Her teary eyes fixed on the kneeling man, and in her mind a whirlwind of memories and doubts pulled her in opposite directions. And in that moment of pure tension, when everyone awaited her answer, fate held its breath. Because what came next could change not only her life, but the future of the entire Kang family. Dae-hyun's request fell upon the hall like a silent bomb, exploding in all directions. For a moment, there was only silence, as if no one dared to breathe. Soon after, whispers and exclamations spread like uncontrollable waves, engulfing every corner of the luxurious space. What should have been a celebration of status had turned into a spectacle of shock and disbelief. Some guests clapped their hands over their mouths, trying to contain their shock, while others were unafraid to voice their disapproval loudly. "This is absurd," exclaimed a businessman, already flushed with indignation. A woman beside him, in a shimmering dress, fanned herself as if about to faint. "He's ruining his own reputation over a mere nanny," muttered another, her eyes fixed on Ha-eun, as if she were responsible for a catastrophe. Among the younger generation, however, the scene had a different impact. There were suppressed sighs, teary eyes, and people who allowed themselves to be moved by the unexpected gesture. For them, it wasn't just a scandal, but a testament to courage, a breaking of the invisible chains that sustained the elitist society in which they lived. Some even risked a timid applause, quickly drowned out by the disapproval of their elders. Seo Ye-jin, unable to contain her own venom, stepped forward. Her voice, thick with fury, pierced the room. "Are you insane, Dae-hyun? Are you going to throw away everything we've built? Your entire family, your entire company, everything, for her?" Her eyes were blazing, but her words sounded more like a cry of despair than a genuine accusation. It was the roar of someone feeling the ground crumble beneath their feet. Dae-hyun's parents were petrified. Kang Dae-hyun, the patriarch, kept his fists clenched on the table, his knuckles white with tension. Lady Yoon-suk, always in control, now seemed on the verge of tears, torn between public embarrassment and the instinct to protect her son. Neither of them dared to stand. Both knew any gesture would be futile in the face of the heir's firmness. Ha-eun, in the eye of the storm, remained motionless. She felt like she was in a distorted dream, where every voice came from far away, but every gaze fell on her like a sharp blade. She felt the crushing weight of society on her shoulders, and the decision she had to make seemed bigger than life itself. As the commotion grew, the cameras captured every detail, ensuring that no word or gesture was missed. The proposal wasn't just an intimate scene, it was an event that would soon spread throughout Seoul, and with every second of waiting for Ha-eun's response, the tension rose, transforming the room into an invisible battlefield. And it was in that moment of chaos and expectation that Ha-eun's gaze, full of doubts and courage, finally began to firm up, preparing the entire room for the decision that everyone feared and awaited at the same time. The entire hall seemed frozen in a single instant, as if every guest had stopped breathing, waiting for the answer that could redefine the night. Ha-eun remained motionless, her heart hammering in her chest, her teary eyes revealing the struggle she was waging within. On one hand, there was the suffocating fear of collective rejection, the crushing weight of hundreds of gazes treating her like an intruder. On the other, there was the raw sincerity in Dae-hyun's eyes, who, kneeling before her, seemed unconcerned with the world's judgment. Her palms grew sweaty, and the marble floor beneath her feet seemed to tremble. The voices around her became indistinct, a distant hum of disapproval and shock, as her mind swirled in a whirlwind of memories. She remembered the times she had been rejected for her humble condition, the closed doors, the silent humiliations she had endured in silence. She also remembered the children she had cared for, the small smiles she had received as payment greater than any coin. And most of all, she remembered his gaze, so different from the looks that had always wounded her. For a moment she considered refusing, not for lack of desire, but for fear that the weight of the choice would fall not only on her, but on everyone connected to him. The Kang name wasn't just a surname, it was an empire, and accepting that request meant placing herself at the center of a storm that could destroy everything she knew. Her lips trembled and a tear ran down her cheek, drawing pent-up sighs from some present. Dae-hyun, still kneeling, didn't look away. His voice, low and firm, pierced the silent chaos of the hall. Don't think about them. Think only about yourself. If it's no, I accept it. But if it's yes, I won't let anyone else humiliate you. Those words struck her like a lightning bolt. For the first time, someone offered not only love but also protection. And in that moment, when her entire body seemed to waver, her soul found the courage it needed. Ha-eun took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a brief second, and when she opened them, she stared unflinchingly at the man before her. "Yes," he replied, his voice shaky but clear enough to echo throughout the room. "I accept." The impact was immediate. Muffled screams, shocked gasps, and a few timid claps blended into a jumble of sounds. Some guests widened their eyes in disbelief, while others simply shook their heads, unable to accept what they saw. Seo Ye-jin, overcome with fury, turned abruptly, as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Ha-eun, her heart still pounding, felt the weight of her choice fall over her like an invisible cloak. But with it came an unexpected strength, as if for the first time she were writing her own story. And as the hall divided between subdued applause and venomous murmurs, she realized there was no turning back from that decision. What she didn't know was that by accepting, she had just opened the door to one last twist, capable of transforming that night into something even more unforgettable. Ha-eun's yes still echoed in the room when Kang Dae-hyun stood up, not as the CEO of a powerful conglomerate, but as a man willing to break the structures that bound him. By holding her hand firmly and carefully, he sealed a gesture that went far beyond a romantic scandal. It was a public declaration of freedom from everything that had ever shaped him. The looks around him varied between shock and disbelief, but none of that seemed capable of shaking the conviction in Dae-hyun's eyes, who, by intertwining his fingers with hers, made a silent promise of protection. The orchestra hesitated for a few seconds, as if waiting for permission to continue. When it resumed the melody, the piano's soft notes cradled the moment. Dae-hyun approached Ha-eun, leaning in to kiss her tenderly and courageously. It wasn't a performative gesture, nor was it impulsive. It was real, decisive, and before everyone's eyes, a choice that broke centuries of convention. The reaction of those present was divided between discreet applause and hasty escapes. The press flashes spared no detail of that moment, which within hours would explode across social media, newspapers, and power circles. Among those leaving the hall was Seo Ye-jin, whose expression did not hide the pain of a public defeat, but her gaze promised revenge, and her departure was only the beginning of something even more dangerous. Dae-hyun's parents, motionless, seemed to absorb the impact of the fall of the empire they tried to control. But before everyone, it was Ha-eun who emerged as the true protagonist. For the first time, her worth was recognized, not by titles, but by sincere choices. And if this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel, like it, and share it with anyone who needs a reminder that true love can blossom even where no one believes. Because what comes next will surprise you even more.